Yeah, I
and it
think,
hides itself.
yeah, with the
yeah.
free Zoom, I think you only get 40 minutes.
Okay, well, we better hurry up then. I only got 14 slides, but Chris knows me better than anybody here. Probably knows I can talk end over end here. So, okay, so you guys see the screen, I'm recording. Okay, here's what we got then to kind of tee it up. And I wanted this to be more, I know everybody knows that I'm an amateur radio operator, right? And so is my buddy Dan there, KC7MSU. And my slide advanced right there. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
One more time. Okay, good. So, but there are other things to consider, or other things that you might or should consider from a backup communications perspective, in addition to amateur radio, which is sort of the amateur radio aspect of it is sort of the full capability, but there's other incremental things that you can be considering no matter what. And we'll talk about that. But I want to start out with the kind of what are those normal modes of communication that we all just expect to be there, like a utility, right? And then what kind of things can interrupt those or impede those, and then why is radio potentially a suitable backup for those modes that we've become to expect to be available. And then that kind of tees us up to move into the different types of radio, right? And I've got a variety of things for you guys to consider that you can do right out of the gate. And then we'll talk in detail about those various radio services, I call them, and you'll see why when we get there. And then we'll talk about some other things to take into account that matter along with the radio aspect of it. And then some resources that you guys can go take a look at and check out to continue, to learn some more. Can you guys see me, by the way, on video as well? Okay, good.
I can.
That's the one screen. That's the one little module I don't have up that I can see. So, okay, let me move on to the next. Okay, so you guys will probably agree. And if you think of any others here, add them. But these are the things that we know and love and expect to be there for us, right? Cell phones these days. Did you know cell phone is radio, basically? Cell phone is RF, but the difference is it depends on an infrastructure, right? Radio, the radio that we're going to talk about does not depend on an underlying infrastructure. One of the reasons that makes it a dependable backup method. So on the cell phone, obviously, we're all using it for voice, for data, for text, for internet, right? That's probably most people. That's our primary mode, right? Primary method, primary implement. Certainly anybody younger than this group assembled, that's true, probably even more true, right? So I know my kids are hesitant to even, and they're in their 20s and early 30s. You don't even see them really with a laptop very much. You know what I mean? But anyway, and then, let alone a landline. I don't even know if my kids ever remember having a landline, but that's still a method out there. We still use landline at work, right? In the office, it's probably not really that anymore. It's probably IP based and running across a data network, just like, internet traffic and everything, groomed a little bit differently, but that's still a method out there that we've known and loved for a couple centuries now, or at least one. And then the internet in general, right? We depend on that for voice, for video, like we're doing here, for collaboration, email, chat, instant message, social media. It's how we get our weather, our news. All those things enter our sort of domain, typically via the internet through some service, right? Service provider, cable, other mechanisms now where that they're bringing to the house with the gig Ethernet and Ethernet. What is it? Ethernet to the curb and all the different. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But there's that's another method of communications that we've become dependent on to communicate. And then you still have television, right? And television has even, you know, a lot of people watch television. The only television they watch is streamed across their internet pipe, right? They don't even do over the air television anymore. So that's kind of the dependency on the other one. But there is cable. Cable people do use television, just cable, non-data still. And then you have some folks that are using television over the air. In fact, television over the air has never been better than it is today with the digital signals and the ability to capture so many very high quality HD quality, you know, television signals with just a very simple antenna that you can put, you know, in the attic or wherever. So those are the normal things. You may think of some others or combinations of those that people depend on to get their news, communicate with each other, right? Everybody, that makes sense, right? I'm stating the obvious there, but it kind of sets the tone for moving over to the next step. So should we assume, right, that those are always available? You know, we subscribe to an internet provider, we subscribe to a telephone provider, we subscribe to a power company, and there's some service level agreement that we have with them, right, that says I've got X amount of uptime guaranteed to you, Mr. Customer, right? But what happens if it goes down? Well, that service to us is interrupted. Well, what are the situations that can exaggerate that, right? Well, weather is one. We've all seen weather play a part in interrupting communications. Probably one of the most or a couple of the most devastating came over the last 20 years. And it was a combination of the sheer devastation of the event and the fact that we weren't as mature to remedy as we are today, but that would be Katrina and 9/11. If either one of those two things happened today, we would recover much quicker because of the things that have been done since then. By the way, I'm not looking at you guys. I'm looking over here at the other screen, so don't think I'm disinterested in you. So that's why I'm facing this way. I don't have everything kind of optimized the way I want it, but it'll have to do. So these are the things, right, that can interrupt our communication method to other people, right? Weather, power outage, we've all seen it, been there. Oftentimes that's weather related. Internet provider outage of some kind, often impacted by that as well. Down, you know, it could be downed aerial services or cut buried services, whether that's power or communications. The natural disasters kind of go along with the weather, hurricane, tornadoes, fires, anything like that, acts of God can cause us an interruption. Man-made disasters, right? Criminal activity, terrorism, we saw have an impact on communications. one that might have been the impetus to get people to think about, well, what would I do if we had some sort of social unrest that was the cause, or what if we had some of the big players censoring us? Maybe censor is a strong word. Maybe it's a nicer word than censor. Maybe they're filtering or grooming our communication, right? I'm trying to be soft here and not alarmist. But I know a lot of people, because of things that have been going on in the country, they pause and say, well, geez, if that could happen, this could happen. And what would I do? How would I communicate with like-minded people? How would I communicate with emergency services? How would I communicate with my boss? How would I communicate with my family, right? So you can add to that list certainly of things that would, interrupt our normal methods of communication. So why radio? Why RF? Why radio frequency? Why is that something that Dan, as an example, Dan and I have been involved in our capacity as radio operators in at least monitoring, if not participating in, providing backup radio communications for entities that have lost primary services. I've been involved with the Georgia Baptist Convention. We have a radio division there, a communications arm. I've been involved with the Red Cross and some other agencies that I'll show you here in a minute. But radio, I'll show you as we develop this why radio is a suitable alternative to the typical communications that we've become to expect as an available service. The reason why, some of the reasons why, by the way, I'm not representing anybody here. I'm not representing any entity, agency, group, or anything. This is all Guy McDonald, right? So I just want to state that. But so this is all my experience, my expertise, my opinion, nobody else's. But radio, it's either not dependent on or less dependent on the commercial power grid, obviously, because our radio equipment, we work on DC power, right? Typically, the radio services that I'm going to show you about, the endpoint equipment, is DC, and typically it's 12 volt DC. So there's a standard there, and 12 volt DC, it turns out, is very easy to produce. There's a variety of ways to do it. So radio is not dependent on the commercial power grid. And I'll develop that whole power thing here in a couple slides. Here's the most important thing. It's not dependent on internet infrastructure. It's not dependent on that underlying communications fabric that we all expect every day, even now, to do our jobs. It's not dependent on that. And I'll show a couple diagrams that, well, I won't either because I didn't have a chance to do that, but I'll explain it to you when we get there. Radio, there are some established services that have dependable capabilities and very well understood, very well adopted. And when we walk through the various services, you'll recognize them. So that's a good thing. The equipment that we're talking about for the various radio services is readily available. That's a good thing. And portable. There's also the benefit of having the capability in whichever of these radio services we're going to talk about to move about, right? That there's a great advantage there to portability. That's just a few things. You can think of some others, I'm sure. So let me go through some of the various types of radios that can be used in some method to provide a backup capability for some aspect of your normal communications. The first one is just standard broadcast radio. Again, our kids, our grandkids, they probably don't even know what an AM FM radio is, right? But you ought to have one. That's all that needs is a power source, and it's got a built-in antenna, and it's going to pick up a variety of local stations where you can get emergency broadcasts and information from news stations and whatever, right? A lot of people today, younger than us, listen to XM or Sirius. I guess it's all one now, right? That's satellite dependent. Over-the-air radio, it's not dependent on anything in between you and the transmitter antenna of that broadcasting entity. So it's a good idea and I have a number of different types, old ones, young ones, middle-aged ones. I just love radios, and I have a variety of AM, FM radios that I exercise periodically. And then in the picture below that, you see just a very minimal representation of some shortwave radios. So shortwave is another broadcast service. It's a receive only, but you're receiving on a different radio frequency range, or bands, we call it, that typically can allow you to hear broadcasts from stations that are much farther away. So shortwave is like the HF of amateur radio. So it's a longer wavelength and travels longer distances, leverages the ionosphere, the atmosphere, the associated propagation for those signals to travel farther, right? you guys have probably heard your parents or grandparents talk about shortwave radio and listening to Voice of America, or I still listen to Radio Havana on shortwave, Radio Moscow, the BBC. You can catch all that stuff on shortwave radio. So what's that get you? Well, it gets you a broader range of possible sources of information that you can listen to, you can monitor, right? So it's good to have a simple, you can buy a very inexpensive shortwave radios these days, or you can buy very expensive ones. I've got several here, some that are one from the 50s, one from the 60s, one current, so there's a lot of cool things that you can do on the nerd side of it. But from a backup communications mode, it's very easy and inexpensive to get a shortwave radio to listen to signals from farther away. So that's sort of your broadcast receive only. And then weather radio, everybody should have a weather radio no matter what. Even if you weren't looking for any kind of backup mode, you really need to have a weather radio. Very inexpensive. You can get one for 20, 25 bucks on up. You can get them in Kroger. You can get them in, I almost said Radio Shack, but those don't exist anymore. But Lowe's and Home Depot and everywhere. And you sometimes some of these grocery stores will have during tornado season or the beginning of tornado season, they'll have a deal where you buy one and somebody will program it for you right there at the store, and just those kind of things. I'll tell you, there's not much programming needs to be done these days because they've made these things so, automated that like with the new NOAA, like that one, you can see I have an example of, can you see that okay? I have an example of this Midland, very popular brand of the Midland, and it uses a particular underlying protocol to notify, not only broadcast weather information, and you probably, Jim is a mariner, so I know Jim has heard the weather station reports and stuff. But you have weather stations all around you, and a weather radio will let you tune into those frequencies of a radio of a weather station that's near you. And not only that, it has an underlying protocol called SAME, S-A-M-E. I had the acronym pulled up here, but basically it's a signaling protocol that allows, whenever there's a weather alert for your location, it actually wakes up your radio, sends you an alarm in the middle of the freaking night if you're going to have a tornado, so that you know to go to the basement, right? So there's some built-in things there. 20, 25 bucks for a weather radio, you really ought to have one. And this is a very common one that I keep here in my Radio Shack, but the one on the bottom there is a typical example of like a hardened, rugged, portable weather radio that also has other things built into it, like the hand crank, right, to charge the battery, strobe light, flashlight, picks up the other radio bands, so you can get some really nice, you can see it even has the NOAA symbol right there on it, on the bottom there in the middle. So it has the same protocol and everything running on it, like this guy does. So that's a good thing for anybody to have is a good weather radio, and some of you may already. And then you got public safety. So the public safety bands used to be very, very easy to monitor. And you had a lot of people that, as a hobby, they would monitor, their local fire and rescue and police and all like that. And you still can do that. It's become a little more difficult, but because they've started to encrypt their transmissions. So you have to have what is it, Dan? There's encryption and there's what am I thinking here? There's analog, there's digital, and then there's encryption. So a lot of the public safety organizations moved from analog systems to digital systems. So now all of a sudden, the folks that had analog scanners can't pick them up anymore. So they have to upgrade to digital scanners. Well, then they threw another wrench in there, and a lot of public safety started to encrypt, right?
Yeah.
So nothing we can do about that. But there are some really good scanners out there that you can buy. Some cheap, some pretty expensive. Depends on what you want to do. Some people do this as a hobby and really nerd out on it. Some people just want to hear what's going on in their neighborhood or their little community. Or like today, I have one here that's by Uniden. It's called the Home Patrol. Am I framing that okay for you?
Yep.
Just one example of many types of scanners that you can get. This one's by Uniden. It's called Home Patrol. And the beauty of some of these newer ones, you don't have to program in any frequencies and stuff like you had to in the old days. You just put your city or your zip code in, and then tell it what services you want to hear. It freaking picks them up and starts scanning them right now. So it makes it very easy for people to, if you're wanting to monitor local public safety, you can get some very good sort of base, like seen in the picture there, or handheld scanners to do that. Good example of, if you want to hear, if we had unrest, if we had the unrest in the neighborhood, I'd fire my scanner up. Actually, I have my scanner out today because my youngest son, he's in flight school now at one of the local airports, and he went up for a flight today, and I was listening to the tower at the airport he was at. So a lot of cool things you can do with a scanner, but I think the most important thing, if you're talking about backup or talking about have something for an emergency, is you know what's going on around you, right? Fire and services, and fire and law enforcement, even utility services, you name it. As long as it's an open frequency and not encrypted, you can hear it. So good, good recommendation there for anybody. And then here's where we start to get into, everything I've showed you so far has been receive only, right? So now we'll start to move into transmit and receive capability. And there are a few types of radio service that are not licensed that you can operate, transmit and receive. And these are, okay, Dale's got one there. That's the FRS, Family Radio Service, basically walkie-talkies. So you can see I've got Citizens Band, right? Citizens Band is, we're all old enough to remember the 70s and early 80s craze, right? And there are still Citizen Band radios in use, and their primary constituency, and not much beyond that. It's not really very suitable for much more than a mile or two. Very low power. It's not very. It's not the best band. It's not the best frequency allocation for that. For what you're looking for. Dan knows it's in the 10 meter. It's in the 11 meter. It's in the 11 meter spectrum, which sits right in the middle of some ham bands. But the thing that makes it less than optimal is, besides the user community that's on it, it's basically the wild, wild west with no, the truckers have their own sort of protocol they follow, but it's really not suitable, for what we're talking about. And except anything suitable in a pinch, right? And under emergency circumstances. So I don't have at the moment, I do have a CB radio. It's one that doesn't work, but I also have an amateur radio that has been modified or opened up, we call it, to work in that band. So I could use those frequency ranges if I needed to in a pinch, but it's probably not something I would recommend to somebody for a backup mode of communication. Limited range, low power, legally low power. The other is the Marine band. You see the white radio, they're pretty representative of what you'd see on a vessel. And Jim is a boat captain, so he knows. And you have a part of the VHF spectrum there, which is you're talking 5, 6, 10 miles, maybe line of sight communication. there. So, and it's expressly for for marine usage. And then here's where we move into, maybe where you want to communicate with your family in a local situation, or a neighborhood watch, or something like that. You can move into the FRS, the Family Radio Service. It's basically walkie-talkies, but with a protocol, a defined set of characteristics. The power output is defined by the service. The receiver sensitivity. You're talking, in a like a cul-de-sac that we're in the house or whatever, quarter mile, flat, open space, maybe half a mile. Typical walkie-talkie kind of thing. Very good if you go into an air show, if you go into a concert, if you go into a festival, if you're going to the mall, right? A good backup mode of communication, very quick to talk with your family member. I think there's Dan, 22 or 24 channels, which a channel is a defined frequency.
Yep.
So you can move channel, it's got the benefit of you're not, everybody's not trying to use the same space. You can change your channels, right? And there's 22 or 24, I can't remember exactly. You can buy a good set of those. In fact, I just bought a set. This is a set by a outfit called Radio Ditty, and it looks much like yours, Dale. I'll pull one out here. Typical, right? And you'll see a variety of different capability. I mean, they're all going to be pretty much the same from a capability perspective. I mentioned the power out is equal on them all. The receiver sensitivity is equal on them all. So what you want to do is look for the features that you like, right? Whether it's the batteries types that it takes, or the charging. These happen to be rechargeable with USB. Some of them use, AA's or AAA's. But it's a neat little tool to have, even if you're driving down the road and you're in two different vehicles, right? And you can talk back and forth. And you can imagine if cell service goes down or whatever, this is a very quick, easy, cheap, method to communicate. Built into these as well, but not necessarily, is the frequencies that fall within the GMRS range, which is the General Mobile Radio Service. You'll typically see those as handhelds used in a business. Think a lumber yard or something like that. It's a non-licensed frequency space, and a business might use those for their yard employees, or anybody that needs to communicate in a relatively small distance. And then you've got a service I'm not real familiar with. I don't know if you are, Dan, but it's only been around since about 2000. That's the MERS. It's actually a licensed frequency spectrum, but not in the US. The US does not require a license for the MURS service. I don't hear much about it. You may, that's why I wanted to throw it up here. So if somebody recommends it to you, just go do your own research on it and see what the capabilities are. But you're like these other services, the FRS and GMRS, you're talking about a small, relatively small range. I think the one thing that does is I think there's the capability to build what is it, Dan? Not a fabric, but like we do sometimes with the ham. With the
repeater stuff. Repeaters.
Well, it actually, none of these services, a repeater is allowed. I'm talking about, I'm not talking about repeating. There's a word I'm looking for, and I'll come up with it later. But anyway, so those are, if you're talking about being without power for a period of time, cell service going down, and you want to stay in touch with a local community of interest, your neighbors, your family, the FRS is the way to go. Everybody can get them, the same frequencies. You can coordinate which frequencies to be on. There's enough space for everybody. They're inexpensive. All right, now here's where we get to really broadening the capabilities. And that's if you consider moving into the amateur radio space. The most important thing now that you gain is you have this you did in the last one, but you have this very robust ability for transmitting and receiving. Here's the key. It is a licensed spectrum, licensed by the FCC. That's a consideration. We're somewhat self-governed and self-policed, but we are dictated by Part 97 of the FCC, which puts some structure around the frequency spectrum that we have access to, the types of modes we can operate, the power output we can use, a variety of things. Because think about it, it's kind of like air traffic control. An air traffic controller is trying to keep the airspace for the users of the airspace from impacting one another, quite literally. Well, the FCC's job is to help deconflict the users of this vast spectrum of frequencies that we have, right? So you have to define parameters by which it is used. So it is licensed. I'm going to talk more about that as we move ahead. But some of the characteristics of amateur radio, and this is where we'll spend most of our time, because this is where you're going to get the most robust backup communications for radio. We have, and Dan will tell you, we have just a massive spectrum of frequency available to us. It's amazing that the government has it. Well, they do on the fringes a little bit, but they haven't, tried to take more of it for their own use or to sell it for commercial use. But we have a lot of access to frequencies. What does that really mean? Well, different frequency ranges behave differently from a distance perspective, a signal strength perspective. All of those things matter. The different frequency ranges behave differently. You'll see more about that in a minute, but basically we have a lot to work with. That family radio service has just 20 some odd individual frequencies that are all very close together in the same, what is it, Dan, 148 something. I don't even remember. I have to turn one on to look it up, but no, that's I'm sorry, that's UH. It's a 462, and then it moves up in very small increments to create those channels. But anyway, in the amateur radio band plan, we have so much frequency to work with. We've got the capability, partly because of that, to get more range on our signal. Part of the way we get more range is the frequency that we use, because it behaves differently. The physics of it behave differently. And then the fact that we can increase our power output and drive that RF signal stronger and farther. On the other services we were talking about with the FRS, GMRS, Marine band, you're just talking a couple watts to 5 watts maybe at the most. Maybe the Marine is 5 watts, but these little guys are like 2 watts. So in the amateur radio world, we have a plan that we use that says how much power we can use where, and we have to abide by that. But the net of that is we're able to increase our range. We have access. We're able to use more modes, and when I say modes, I mean different techniques on top of the RFs. That could be voice. And we call it phone in amateur radio, but voice is an analog mode. I talk into the mic, and that my audio, the 0 to 4K of my audio, rides on top of an RF signal and goes across the world, right? That's a mode. We also have digital modes. We're we're doing a lot of work these days where we've mated our computer to our amateur radio, and we can actually send emails, send images, send files. We can use certain protocols to do certain things because the properties and characteristics lend themselves to it. So we've got digital, I can send, so think of it this way, like for the Georgia Baptist, I could send emails over a radio signal. So I didn't need that underlying internet infrastructure, right? I could send photos. Think I'm surveying a disaster site. I can send photos over the RF, right? From a radio to a radio. I didn't need any infrastructure. So that's what I mean when I say digital. Then of course, the old standby we call CW, continuous wave. That's the Morse code. Probably one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for, Dan? It's not survivable, but it without being manufactured with a computer, it's a mode that uses very low power, can go very far and be heard from very far away. It's where maybe I'm trying to talk from here to Australia, they cannot hear my voice. They might be able to hear Morse code because the characteristics, the narrowness of the signal, right, penetrating through noise and being picked up on the other side. Anyway, that's built into this whole survivable aspect of it. So we've got all these, we've got the ability to leverage a variety of modes in this radio service. I mentioned power already. Repeaters in a local area like let's say Metro Atlanta, if I want to talk on one of my amateur radio handhelds, this is a Japanese Yaesu, very popular brand of handheld radio, and I can get 5-watt output on this if I want. But the laws of physics with VHF or UHF and only at 5 watts are going to dictate how far that signal travels, right? So the power output, that frequency range, the fact that it's line of sight, all those variables come into play to say that this is only going to maybe be 5, 6, 10, 12 miles if I go radio to radio, and I don't have any obstacles. The way we tackle that in a metropolitan area or in a mountain range area or really anywhere is we introduce an intermediary device that we call a repeater, and it's typically on a tower or where you would see cell tower antennas. Amateur radio repeater antennas were there long before. So the way that I can talk to somebody that's maybe 50 miles away from me on a handheld at 5 watts on VHF or UHF is I talk to a repeater, and then that repeater talks to the other person. So my signal, as the name implies, is repeated, right? I talk to the repeater, it turns it around and sends it out the output. The other person hears it. We talk back and forth across this network of repeaters. Speaking of networks of repeaters, we've gotten so advanced in the amateur world, probably over the last 30 years, and certainly more so lately with some things like D-Star, but we might have these repeaters connected to each other across the internet or connected across the landline. So you build this fabric of, I could pick up, not this radio, but one of my others, I could pick it up, I can talk to a repeater in Atlanta, and one of my buddies in Savannah is hearing it on his handheld because the repeaters are linked to one another across a network. Well, that network could go down. We don't depend on it, but it's something that we built. But the repeaters are so important on the local communications. In most cities like Metro Atlanta, we have dozens and dozens of them, typically privately owned by individuals or agencies, entities, clubs, and they'll generally be co-located on a public broadcasting tower or a local cell tower, or just a variety of a hospital tower, just a variety of things, everything you can think of. But it gives us a method to move around within this geographical area and always have a way to communicate across a broader area locally. And the reason we have to do that is this frequency range, VHF and UHF, is line of sight. So it has limits. The laws of physics come into play. I mentioned the integration with computers. It's broadened the way that we use the service to include even in disasters, right? Because if you have a disaster in one area, that doesn't mean it's affected in another area, and you can still leverage some of the capabilities of the computer integration. And then, of course, I mentioned this already, that when you move into the amateur radio world, now you're not just listening. Now you're an active transmit and receive. So you can see on the bottom part of that just to represent where that repeater sits. And you can see that's the way we deal with talking in a relatively small geographic area with handhelds or mobiles in our vehicles, or even with a base station, talking to a repeater that's within range of our radio, and that allows us to get farther coverage. Then if you look at the top, that kind of, now we move into the whole what we call high frequency, HF. That's the longer wavelength, travels longer. The properties are such that the properties of that signal are such that the waves bounce off the ionosphere. That's the whole key to this long distance communication, is those signals, you can see by the chart there, they don't penetrate the ionosphere. UHF or VHF, like the local frequencies I was talking about that we use, the wavelength is such smaller that it's not long enough to refract off this dense ionosphere. It goes right through it, right? And that's why when you talk to the space station or to a satellite, you're talking on these frequency ranges because they break through that ionosphere and allow your signal to go. That's why the space station, the Apollos, all those were the higher frequencies. I'd say not high frequency, they're very high, ultra high, and that allows them to penetrate that ionosphere. In fact, on this radio right here, not with this antenna, but with a different antenna, on this radio here, I actually talked to Colonel Doug Wheelock, who was an astronaut on the International Space Station. 5 watts VHF, straight up to the station, which is about 220 miles up and back down. And so that signal has to go through the ionosphere. But the way that we get these long distances is with those higher frequencies that have longer wavelength, and that wavelength refracts off of that ionosphere, which is a layer of charged particles. So it's dense, and radio waves bounce off of it. They can't penetrate it. Well, you can see how the diagram depicts a signal hitting it and bouncing back down to Earth. And you can see the distance there. Depending on your angle, the angle that your signal leaves your antenna, you can play around with that angle, right, and see how it would refract down even longer, perhaps, right? Or it's often the case that a signal might bounce off the ionosphere, bounce off the ocean, back up to the ionosphere, and then back down into Europe, let's say. So we might, be talking across the world, and our signal may have bounced up and down several times before whoever answers us has heard it. So that's kind of how the longer distances become possible with these frequencies that we call high frequency, or HF. So here's some of the other advantages besides just the physical properties and characteristics of the frequency spectrum. the thing that makes amateur radio an attractive alternative for, backup communication. There's a set of established processes and protocols. There's a set of established organizations that you can align with, and that have built dependable processes that can be used in the event of a disaster or in the event that there's a need for backup communication. We have a league, which is basically a community of interest for radio operators called the American Radio Relay League. It's really an advocate for what, Dan, the 600 or 700,000 of us in the US. And we're actually a small population of hams in the US. Probably we're bigger than we've ever been numbers wise, but we pale compared to Japan and the rest of the world. I don't know, a couple million or several million worldwide, and we're only 600,000 or 700,000 licensed radio amateurs. But we have this organization called ARRL that is just, it's just a community interest group that we have that advocates on our behalf. And then you have the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, which is really probably the most critical organization of amateur radio operators that are dedicated to emergency service. And typically those are governed or self-governed at the local level, typically by county. So pretty much every county in the country has a group of amateur radio operators that have come together and are part of the Amateur Radio Emergency Service. And there's some commonality that we have among all the groups, the way that we practice, the things that we do, the way that we prepare. And then there's still those that were in the military, Dale, Chris, there's still Mars around. You may remember Mars was a way for troops abroad back before cellular and even satellite telephone. We used HF radio for and used a what do we call it, phone patch. So you would basically mate a phone system to the radio, right? And then you could make a telephone call, across a radio link, across HF for long distance. I remember my dad doing it from Vietnam. Well, that service, it was called military affiliate radio service, I think was the name for years and years. And Dan, I think just over the last 5 or so, the name has changed. It's still Mars. The acronym is the same, but there's I can't remember, they've changed it because it doesn't have this direct affiliation like it used to have, but it's a separate service. I'd say most, if not all Mars operators are also amateur radio operators, but they have their own Mars call sign. They have their own sort of protocol that they follow for communicating around the world and stuff. So that's still a thing. And then the Salvation Army has their own sort of outfit called Saturn that does good work in disasters. And then there's a lot of, in the amateur radio world, in the amateur radio emergency service world, we call the folks that we help with our radio service as their backup, we call them served agencies. Think the Red Cross, think a local hospital. So there's a variety of, think National Guard. I'm involved with the Georgia National Guard. We provide them a backup service and that they exercise periodically. So there's a lot of agencies that we're connected with that we have an established MOU, memorandum of understanding, about how we operate together and how they can leverage our capabilities as a backup to their primary modes. The ability to transmit and receive, I mentioned that a couple times. we have we use a mechanism we call nets or networks, where we practice like an amateur radio roll call, typically geographically defined or community of interest defined, and it allows for a repeatable method of assembling a group of radio amateurs for a purpose. And we do a lot of practice on those nets. In fact, some of those nets run regularly. My local Paulding County net runs at Sunday night, and then the Georgia statewide net runs every Sunday night. So there's an in-place, built, ready to go mechanism that's regularly exercised. And why? And on that net, building that network of stations across some geographical area, we can, what we call traffic handling. We can move a piece of information from one place to another. And then we've even defined the levels of priority for particular types of traffic, right? So emergency urgent, emergency, welfare. So there's different categories. So we've even prioritized the types of traffic. And whenever radio amateurs arrive at a scene for some disaster relief or to provide backup communication, it's like we already know exactly what to do, how we're going to do it, how we're going to get messages from one place to the other. There's even established nets where every day, several times a day, on different frequency ranges, different modes, there are people practicing traffic handling, sending them one message from the East Coast to the West Coast. And there's a way that we do that with a series of nets on voice, on Morse code. And so my point there is amateur radio operators stand a really good chance of being able to move information back and forth if the underlying infrastructure has gone away. Exercise, we practice a lot. So we will do exercises to, my buddy Chris, at work, we call them scrimmages. You practice like you play like you practice. And we do that a lot in the amateur radio world, especially in the amateur radio emergency service. In fact, several times a year, there are some big ones that the whole country does together. Winter field day, and then field day in the summer. Every radio club and emergency service group across the country spends Friday night, Saturday, Sunday exercising. And it's actually even been gamified, where you can score points based on satisfying certain things, right? Contacting so-and-so, or operating on solar power only, or operating on this, or so you get the opportunity to practice a lot of different variables inside of a scenario. And then every October, the amateur radio service has a simulated emergency test, where in our state of Georgia, they'll issue, okay, here's our scenario. Here's, there was a nuclear weapon discharged in Savannah. That's the scenario. And then the state, we mobilize around how do we deal with that? How do we get traffic? Or it could be a hurricane, or it could be, you can imagine a nuclear power plant, or, explosion or whatever. My point is, we probably exercise as much or more than a lot of public service organizations do. They may do more tabletop stuff than we do, but we do a lot of practical exercises to test things. And then there's a lot of clubs. The cool thing about amateur radio is it really gets down to the local level, by city, or even portion of a city or a community, where a group of radio operators get together, not just for practicing backup and emergency, but all the other cool things that we do in the hobby, like Dan does mountaintop stuff. Dan's a goat. He does these soda summits on the air where it sort of gamifies making contact from summit to summit and all these different things. So we have a lot of different aspects of the hobby, and you know, we have clubs where we can nerd out on stuff like that. All right, so what is it, 9:40? I think I'm still within my recording time, and we're getting close here. So, all right, so for amateur radio, it is a licensed space, obviously, by the FCC. I mentioned Part 97 defines what we can do and how we can do it. There are 3 license levels, technician, general, and extra. There are exams associated with each level. What are the differences in the levels? Well, the technician level is the entry level, basically 35 question multiple guess test, maybe 200 questions in the pool, very manageable and easy. The pool of questions are known to you, so you can study the actual questions that you're going to see. You're going to see 35 of about 200 or 250. I don't remember, Dan. It's been about 12 years for me since I took it, but so it's very easy, very simple, very easy. Even if you're not a radio nerd like Dan, you can see all of his test equipment in the background there. If you can memorize, you can pass the technician exam. And then you move up to the general. What does the general get you? It's the same. It's about a 35 question exam, I think, the same number of questions in the pool. If you can memorize, you can pass it. If you know a little bit about electronics and stuff, you'll do very well. But you don't need to be. What the general license gets you that the technician does not is access to more frequency spectrum. So the technician level, you're basically allocated the VHF and UHF space with a little bit in the HF, the 10 meter spectrum, 20, what is that, Dan? 27 megahertz?
Yeah, 27 through upper 28s.
Yeah, and that's considered HF. And you can get, you can get some long distance out of that. But to really get access to the frequency spectrum that allows you to talk globally, the general class license is where you really want to be. And then the extra, the only thing with the extra is probably, I only missed one on the extra, but I was already a nerd, but it's harder. It's very hard. The extra, it's a 50 question test, and I think the pool is 400 or 500. So it's almost out of your memorization realm, because you'd have to memorize all 400 or 500 questions, right? And there's a little more theory and some more radio stuff in there. And the only thing, it really doesn't give you, Dan, I don't even remember what it gives you. It is a little bit of access in some of the frequency ranges that we have as extras that they don't have as generals and techs. But the sweet spot for the best access to the broadest range and to have the greatest capability is just the general class license. I mentioned before, we're kind of self-policing, self-governing, self-examining. We have this concept of volunteer examiners. So generally speaking, a local club or one of the amateur radio emergency service groups will not only deliver the exam, but teach classes. When I was in Savannah, I was one of the instructors, so I taught all the levels for free. I mean, we just do it as a community service thing, and then the exam costs like $15 to take, I think. So it's pretty, we're pretty straightforward there. The licenses renew every 10 years. You don't have to retest. You just have to resubmit to get your license renewed. I think it's still like that, Dan. I know there's been some changes with I think there were some changes with the vanity call sign cost or something, but anyway, It's pretty simple. It's pretty simple to get an amateur radio license at the technician level, and really not very hard for the general level, just a little bit more studying. A lot of folks will study, they'll do a really good study and they'll take both the tech and the general in the same session. A lot of people will do that, and they save themselves $15. You can take all the tests in the same session if you want to for the same price. But a lot of folks, while they're studying for the technician, a lot of the general questions are honestly some of the technician questions reworded or expounded on a little bit. So a lot of people just say, well, geez, if I'm going to invest some time studying, I might as well study for the tech and the general. And you can, I'm going to show you where to go find all this stuff. But, you know, this one's old. I've been licensed for about 12 years now. And this was one of those from back then, I believe. I don't remember, but you know, it's just a very comprehensive study guide with a CD involved. I'll show you the links to where you can go find stuff like this. You want to study, and if you go to a local club and take some instruction from somebody, they might recommend, they'll have something that they'll probably recommend. There's a variety of study guides that you can take a look at. Let me see here. So that's that. Okay. What are some other things besides the pure radio part of it? Well, think about your batteries, right? Remember, all of our amateur radio equipment, we can power. The standard is 12 volts DC. So we can power all of our stuff with 12 volts DC. So that means marine battery, car battery, you know, batteries from an old UPS, you know, anything that can deliver 12 volts, we can power amateur radio gear on. Generators, probably a good idea to have anyway, but you can run radio equipment on some very low-end generators. It doesn't have to be like a whole house generator. It doesn't have to be something that'll run your fridge and freezer and everything. It can be just a little Honda something or another. What, you know, it doesn't draw very much current. So generator is a good thing. Solar, most solar output delivers to 12 volts. So that's another consideration. And you can get some very economical solar panels, especially like Dan. Dan, do you use a solar panel when you're on the mountaintops?
I use both batteries and solar.
Yeah. Yeah, so pretty common there, and it allows us to be independent from, once again, that commercial power grid. And then the antennas. So, and Dan probably agrees with me because he's a super nerd, but there you go. There's some antennas for you. The most important part of any radio station by far is the antenna, because you can have an awesome radio, an awesome tuner, an awesome power supply. If your antenna's for shit, that's the weakest link. So it's an important consideration, but that doesn't mean it's going to be complicated. Most of these, like all of these radios that we were talking about, the scanners and the NOAA radio and everything, they've all got these captive built-in antennas. A lot of these, especially the amateur bands, we can use a variety of different antenna types, and we can change antennas. I could even connect any of these to, is that a Kenwood, Dan? Any of these to
Yep.
like a base station antenna, right? And like I've got an antenna up in the attic that I can connect any of the little handhelds to, and just a lot of different things that come into play. And the antenna is a very important one. For my HF, for my long distance communication, I'm talking all over the world. I've just got a resonant dipole long wire antenna strung up in the pine trees in the back of my house. That's my long range antenna. You can make that yourself. I mean, very cheap, inexpensive. You just need to talk with somebody about frequency, resonance and wavelength and frequency. You need to know how much wire resonates at a particular frequency, blah, 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 right? We have formulas for all that. It's no big deal. but it can be very simple. So for an amateur radio station like mine, like Dan's, for us to talk across the county, across the state, across this country, across the continent, across the ocean, across the world, we can do that with the same radio and the same antenna. We might use different frequencies to do it, but we can talk anywhere in the world with just a 12-volt battery or 12-volt power supply, whatever that is, 12-volt power source, a power supply, a battery, solar, on your freaking Peloton. You can connect the wheel of your Peloton. I don't care how you do it, but as long as you can create some AC power to deliver to 12 volts DC. So you need a power supply, you need the radio, and you need an antenna. Those are the three primary components that Dan and I are really concerned with. We have a lot of other intermediary things that we can use, right, that help us to optimize and blah, blah, blah. But the three main things: power source, radio, antenna. And that's how we talk all across the world. All right, so here's some things, and I'll see if I can get the recording to everybody or post it on my Facebook group or something. If not the recording, but the PowerPoint. If not the PowerPoint, then these links, right? I'll get these to everybody. But there's a few things I would recommend just out of the gate. There's a lot more, but these are the things I would look at. And I'm sorry about that color there. I couldn't get that green to change, but that first link is how to become a licensed amateur radio operator. So far, I've just been telling you Guy from Guy. Well, how to become a licensed amateur radio operator from the Amateur Radio Relay League. That'll explain to you everything you need to know. And then here's a really cool link that I found that kind of fits in with, it's built for the prepper community, the way that these two amateur radio operators wrote the content. But I read through it and nothing about it freaked me out like I was going to be in a cult or anything. I thought everything was great. And it's the beginner's guide to amateur radio, and it's from a prepper's perspective. And it talks about a lot of the same things I just talked about. In fact, I plagiarized some of it, but I'll make sure you guys have that link. Great resource. And then the Amateur Radio Study Guide, you'll on the ARRL link website, you'll see some recommended study guides. And then even on, there's a website called QRZ.com that has some practice exams. So you can, and they're not the only one, I'm just giving you one example, but there's other websites where you can go to practice the test and just, you can set it up so that it never repeats the same 25, right? And it only repeat, the next time you take it, only give me the ones that I missed, or, you can groom the way that you prepare on some of these test generators. And that's how I did a lot of my studying is, book study and whatever, but the benefit of actually running through these test questions was awesome. And most people will leverage some of those as they prepare for the exam. So I think that's the last slide. Let me stop. I wanted to make sure to get all that content in my 40-minute record window. So now let me open it up for questions, and I'll answer anything with the time we got left.
Hey, Guy, do you have a quick way to cut and paste those into the chat window?
Yeah, let me do that. Let me stop that. Yeah, Chris is like, I'm not waiting for you to figure out how to send that to me. Put it in the chat.
Hey, Guy, I have a radio here. I can show you that, like what I use
Yeah.
out on the mountains, because it's a little bit different.
Yeah, take it away, Dan. Yeah, Dan uses, we call Dan, the way Dan operates, we call QRP, low power. So Dan, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so I've got, a lot of mobiles and handhelds and stuff like that. But this is my HF rig that I use out on the mountains. called a Elecraft KX3. This is a QRP rig. Its maximum power is 15 watts, but typically I'll operate this on between 5 and 10 watts. And whether I'm using single sideband voice mode or CW, this is the rig that I'll use out on mountaintops around Arizona. Matter of fact, I've talked all around the world on this, on both single sideband and on CW with as low as 1 watt on CW. Pretty fun little rig. And that's just using simple antennas like these. These are linked dipoles that I string up on the mountaintops. Very lightweight antenna, probably weighs about 10 ounces for this that I throw in my
That didn't
backpack.
carry through with the hyperlink in the chat, did it?
No, just text.
Yeah, okay. All right, let me keep talking, Dan. Let me pull those
Okay.
out of.
So Dan, how high up do you have to get the wire?
So I use a collapsible crappie fishing pole, and it goes up about 18 to 20 feet, and that's where I hang that antenna from.
Ah, very cool.
And this is another antenna that I use with my my HT, so VHF and UHF. So we talk all over the place on these as well. I don't have my beam antenna in here, but line of sight, we've talked from mountaintops here in Arizona all the way out into California, just over 400 miles on VHF with a handy talkie. So you can do some pretty amazing things between mountaintops and stuff.
Yeah, Dan or Chris, if you're already up at elevation on a hilltop, you know, you basically, you know, it's not as critical, right? The antenna at that point, because you're already at that elevation. The only consideration then has got to be resonant on the frequency band that you're using.
Very cool.
My chat. What other questions? Okay, there's one link.
There you go. Now you're cooking with gas.
Yeah, I'm having to pick these out of my PowerPoint, so stick with me here.
It's even blue instead of that whatever green.
Yeah, that was baby shit green's what that was.
Yeah, it makes it nice because everybody can just click save the chat and boom, they get the file.
There you go. Let me get to
Dan, what was the handheld you said for your mountaintop stuff? I couldn't write that fast enough.
Oh, this is a Kenwood Th D72. So this is pretty unique because it has APRS built into it. So what I do is I turn this on when I start my hikes, and there's an APRS page that, for example, my wife could look and see where I'm at on the mountaintop.
Okay.
And then, but I also carry a Garmin GPS that has satellite built into it as well. So I also have tracking that way. And
Yeah, I made the mistake. I made the mistake of turning that on a trip one time, and I thought it was cool because every once in a while I would text my wife and let her know that I was moving and where I was in the country, and I didn't know, but I found out rather quickly that it also tells my average speed. So I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, I'm a snail, so I don't move very fast up the mountains, but I get there. So
yeah, I can see where it's super handy when we go deer hunting. We have those.
So on the speaking of the handhelds, I've got a couple different variations here to kind of show maybe a couple of extremes in price range. This Yaesu VX7 as an example. Very, very high quality brand, very highly regarded. A lot of features, VHF and UHF dual band. The later versions of this one is a dozen years old, but the later versions of these Yaesus even have built-in GPS, built-in APRS, like Dan's talking about. So a lot of new features. This was probably at the time $250, $300. This little guy here is one of the new modern, modern handhelds that work. This is a dual band, VHF and UHF, 5-watt output. This was probably what, Dan, these and the Baofangs probably run $30, 30, yep. $40. You know, it's and full featured. I mean, you know, same, all the same characteristics and everything. So the price point has come down quite a bit on some of these the handheld stuff, and so there's a price point for everybody depending on
yep.
on what you want to do.
I think these are a little bit cheaper now. This particular Kenwood model, I think, was like $389 when I bought it a couple years ago.
Yeah, and then you don't see, I don't know if you see my station back here, but I've got a mixture of some shortwave stuff and more shortwave stuff, and then a true amateur radio station here that's 80s vintage with a HF transceiver, a companion tuner, a companion power supply down here. So I just like that old, it's dials, knobs, and switches. I also have a more modern HF long range station. Dan, I've got the Yaesu 857D, which is it's a HF, UHF, and VHF. It's all built into one radio. I actually have it in my truck, and I'm able to use it mobile. But I can talk around the world on it or talk locally through the repeaters and what have you. So there's a variety, a wide variety of equipment types and capabilities and price points and all of that stuff. And the best way to sort through all of that is to talk to another ham.
Yep.
But remember the basics. I mean, the basics, if you're looking to communicate, is 12 volts of power, a radio of some kind, and an antenna, right? And then all the other things become added by what you need, right? You know, do I need long distance? Do I need short? Do I need, you know, whatever I need will sort of dictate the capabilities of the equipment that you're looking for. And then after that, it all becomes, what do I want? Right? Not what do I need, what do I want? And all the accoutrements that come along with, it's just like any other hobby. I mean, you can, you know, Chris, you're a bike guy. Jim, you're a boat guy. I mean, you know, some hams have lots and lots sunk, you know, into the hobby, and they do a lot of different things. And so it can run away with you if you want to, but it doesn't.
But it doesn't have to, though.
No, absolutely not. In fact, most people will get their technician license, get themselves a little handheld, and begin communicating locally with other hams, you know, that are in the region through the repeaters, and then it just grows from there. But the radio I mentioned, if you wanted a long distance, you know, long range radio that you can talk across the state, across the country, across the world, you know, you can get into a brand new radio to do that, you know, sub 1,000, $800-900 on a really good quality radio, and then it just goes up from there into the thousands. You know, if you want a built-in pan adapter, built-in, you know, frequency spectrum analyzer, you know, you can just go balls to the wall like any other hobby, but you don't have to. I think this HF station I picked up from a ham in Statesboro, it's 80s vintage. It's a Kenwood, very nice system. You know, it had power supply, the radio, a tuner, all of that together. I think I gave him $450 for it, you know. And the good thing about stuff of that vintage and older is you can work on it yourself. You know, there's a lot of things that, you know, can go wrong that you can fix on, you know, you can fix you can fix yourself or with somebody who knows about it. And a lot of the newer stuff that has multi-level, multi-board stuff, you ain't touching that, just like any other consumer electronics, right?
Is yours a 430 guy?
430.
Yeah, so you can find those at Hamfest, and that 430 will still outrun a lot of radios that you can buy brand new. And the nice thing about that is it sounds fantastic, and most of your all your controls are really out on the front of the radio instead of a lot of the newfangled ones where you have to go into menus.
Yeah, menus and deep, like my radio that's in my truck, it's more capable than this technically, but it's layered menus, right? It's there are buttons and knobs on the front, but you got to do this button to get to a deeper layer. So this button means something else than it says, blah, 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 right? On these older radios, everything's right out there. Everything has its own knob or switch or whatever. But I don't want to get too complicated, because the message I want to get across to anybody that's interested in backup communications is that it can be very simple. It's three main components: a power source, a radio, and antenna. It can be that simple, and you can talk across the world. That radio station back there is talked to Antarctica and Mongolia and everywhere in between.
Well, thanks, man, for hosting this and putting out this information. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, man. Yeah, take a look at that, the preparation guide. That's what is it called?
I got it snagged.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. That's probably one of the most comprehensive I've seen. That's like a beginning tutorial for using amateur radio in this way. It even talks about the FRS radios and other stuff too. So it's pretty good. You can share that with other people. I mean, lots of good basic information there.
I appreciate it.
All right. See you later, Chris.
I'm gonna go back and say hi to my wife.
All right.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thanks,
Hey, Guy,
Scott.
thank you. Thank you,
You got
guys.
it, Dale. Jim, Mike, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too, man. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Scott. Y'all have a
All
good
right.
night.
Yeah.
All right.
Cheers. See ya.
Cool.